Hello and welcome to OptimisticWellness.com, the real story interview series. And today I have Colin Wright. And Colin, thank you so much for being here on the show. Good shirt, by the way, good shirt color, nice and bright.
Yeah, we did want to synchronize, I think, was the idea. But thanks for having me, though. Very happy to be here.
Yes, the synchronization, it was telepathic communication. Welcome, and could we start off, Colin? Could you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, your 4-month travel adventures, and your new book, Exile Lifestyle?
Absolutely. The brief story is that I move to a new country every 4 months based on the votes of my readers, the people who read my blog, exilelifestyle.com. And while I'm traveling, I do what I can to kind of learn about the local culture and learn as much of the language as possible and meet people and make connections between different countries and essentially try to gain new perspective. And that perspective helps me because I'm a big picture person, but also because I start businesses. I run a handful of little business ventures from wherever I happen to land, essentially anything I can bootstrap and run from the road. And then I also do some publishing. I've done, I guess it would be about 5 books at this point. The most recent one was called My Exile Lifestyle. That's a collection of stories. The other ones are kind of businessy oriented stuff about networking and personal branding, that type of thing, which I have a great deal of background in. And yeah, basically the whole concept is based around trying to fit my business endeavors around my lifestyle rather than the other way around.
And I have My Exile Lifestyle, bought it, read it once through completely, and then I just I skimmed through it a second time to help out with this interview, and it's a great book, my favorite of yours, as I mentioned to you before, and it's just great. So I have some questions here from the book. I like to do this kind of chronologically sometimes. So I guess we'll start with your first experience with leadership. This was your ALR, your accidental leadership realization, through Magic the Gathering card game. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Because I love that story.
It was fun to finally get to tell that story because a lot of people assume based on what I'm doing now and kind of how I carry myself and run my brand that, things have just always come easily and that, leadership was just something that was natural and everything like that. But God, there was a time where I just could not figure out how all of that worked. And I accidentally found myself in a leadership position with the story that you mentioned when I was playing this collectible card game called Magic the Gathering, which is one of those things. It was kind of like Dungeons and Dragons for kids, I guess, at the time. Very popular for a while. And a lot of my friends played it, and I started playing it because a lot of my friends at school played it. And I realized that I needed a bigger group of people to play with if I was going to get better, if I was going to have better cards to trade, if I was going to have better skills in which to crush my opponents under my deck of cards. And I decided that in order to do that, I'd start inviting people to the local bookstore that I went to, the bookstore, the only one on my side of town that carried Magic cards. So I became pretty well known there, and they said yes, thankfully, when I asked if I could invite some friends to come play cards with me. And one thing led to another. Basically, over time, it got way out of control. And instead of just a small group of friends, it became like 40 or 50 people. It probably was much larger than that at some point, too. We got some local press coverage. We had people that I'm meeting now that told me they remember me from back. My little sister's fiance, apparently, way back in the day, he came to my Magic card games, and he didn't know who I was. I didn't know who he was.
Small
and he later
world.
met. God, it's an incredibly small world. So what this eventually led to, though, is that the owner of the bookstore offered me a job. And I was like 14 at the time, too, so I had to go get a work permit, but it was my dream job because I read incessantly and played Magic cards, and I got like 40% off everything in the store. So even though I was making very little money, that little bit of leadership, setting everything up and then introducing people to each other when they would come in and making sure that they got oriented, and really what I now know as kind of basic customer service, that was the kind of thing that led me down that path of wanting to work hard and wanting to do good work and make money and be in the position to help people out.
Okay, so at 14, that's when you got your first leadership experience. You started your first business at 19. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. essentially what had happened there, I was in college. I was dual majoring in graphic design and illustration, and I had like 5 jobs. I was writing for the local paper. I was doing design work for a couple different companies, and one of those companies was a magazine. So I was doing the graphic work for the magazine, and I was looking at how they were competing. It was the smaller magazine in town, and what they were doing just simply didn't make sense to me. They were trying to copy the bigger magazine, and I was thinking, well, if you're behind and you're doing the exact same thing as the other magazine, you'll never catch up. I mean, you're always going to be just pacing them and playing it too safe.
Innovate, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I made this suggestion to the owner, and he said, isn't that cute? The designer thinks he knows what he's talking about. Know your place, kid. Go off. I appreciate it, but just know your place. And I said, well, I guess maybe my place isn't on this magazine. So I quit and I started my own magazine.
No, they give no love for the designer, huh?
No, man. It's so basically, yeah. That was I was really upset about it because I thought, this is such an obvious thing that I'm telling them. I shouldn't even have to tell them. These are like 50, 60-year-old men who have been in business for a long time. How is it that they got so kind of slow and clunky? They were just playing it safe, and I wasn't, because I had very little to lose. So I started up the magazine. I called it STEM Magazine. It was kind of an art and culture thing. It did pretty well for a while. I made some epic failures along the way as well, but it was an incredible learning experience, and something I would highly recommend to anybody, especially people in school, because you do have that safety net of school underneath you. So if you fail, so what? You're in school.
Yeah. And you mentioned epic failure. It's funny that you mentioned that. That was one of the questions that I wanted to ask you about. I believe it was with some event planning that you had. How does that... Could you talk about that failure and how it feels nowadays from where you're at, looking back to that epic failure?
It's still cringeworthy when I think about it, but this actually had to do with that magazine. We had this incredibly successful first event to launch the magazine, and it was one of the biggest ever in the history of the city, and just way bigger and more successful than I could have possibly hoped for. And I had great people working with me, and I had a lot of luck on my side as well, but things went very well. So for the second event, for the launch of the second magazine, expectations were so high, and my expectations of myself were so high, because at this point I hadn't failed yet. So I had this really probably badly built up sense of my own power at this point, and decided to just go full blast and pull out all the stops and do everything, get everyone involved. Let's have this biggest party ever and do it in the middle of downtown and rent out the space and get the school involved and get Rock the Vote involved and get everybody involved. Let's just do it. Let's kick some ass. And it was rained out, and I didn't have a plan B. And essentially what it came down to was poor planning on my part, and kind of a feeling of invincibility that I had after that first success. And this is why a lot of friends that I have who run businesses will not hire anybody who hasn't failed yet, who hasn't had some business venture that has totally crushed them. Because if you can fail and get back up, then you'll be great. It doesn't matter. I mean, failure is a part. It's just a step on the way towards success. But if you fail, or if you've never failed, but then find yourself failing and then just collapse and curl up into a ball and start crying and never talk to anyone ever again, which is exactly what I wanted to do for the first day or two after that happened, then it's tough, because failure, you just have to expect it. And nobody really wants to hire somebody who's just going to collapse and throw in the towel at the first sign of things not going their way. So it was a super valuable lesson, but it still is cringeworthy. There was so much writing on that and so much press and everything. The buck definitely stopped with me. Everybody else did their role, and it was my mistake that made everything go wrong.
Resilience is a very desirable character trait, but what you got to go through, which unfortunately you got to go through tough stuff to get through that resilience.
Yes, you do. You have to thicken that skin yourself. Nobody's going to do it for you.
So this on another note, this Circadian 3, was that after the failure?
Yes, it was actually.
Okay.
That was something that I started. That was something that I started after school. Actually, that was I started it as a project where every day for a year. Because I took a job after college. I got rid of the businesses. I was running a studio and a magazine, just sold off the assets of those very cheaply, actually, and then started working for a studio in LA, where I basically told myself I would work there for 1 year, and I'd learn everything that I could from people who know what they're doing, because I was just playing it by ear. And for that year, I knew I was probably going to be bored out of my mind. Everything was very easy compared to kind of what I was putting myself through in college. So I started this project so that every day for a year I would create a photograph, an illustration, and a short story. So the Circadian 3, kind of a metaphor for that. And yeah, I mean, it was a wonderful project, and I still have just this huge collection of work that I created during that time period, and it really did keep me sane. It gave me something to do and some way to express myself outside of what a client wanted me to do, a way to keep on evolving my style. A really, really valuable project.
Uh-huh. And this, I heard about this through your TEDx talk in Cambodia.
Which was a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah, it really was. I enjoyed that. And actually, in that talk, you talked about extreme lifestyle experiments. And this is actually something that I noticed you've adopted as a lifestyle. This is would you consider this like your lifestyle?
Absolutely. A lot of what I do revolves around experimentation.
Oh, could you tell us a little more about that extreme lifestyle? I love that vocabulary, extreme lifestyle experiment. How it benefits you, and maybe like why you would recommend that to other people, to people watching this interview.
Absolutely. So the core concept behind an extreme lifestyle experiment is that you change something about your life. Usually, it can be dramatic. It doesn't have to be dramatic, but something about your habits or your reflexes or the way that you normally do things, but only for a certain period of time. And that's what makes it an experiment rather than just a life change. Because that means that at the end of the day, at the end of the year, for example, with the Circadian 3 project, I could go back and check and say, is this something I want to continue to do? Is this what went right, what went wrong? And you're able to really see how you can improve upon it. And in my case, for example, with the Circadian 3 project, I didn't want to continue to create all three things every day, but carrying a camera around with me dramatically changed the way that I looked at the world. And that was something that was really low maintenance and really impactful to my life and to the way I viewed things and to my creativity level. So now, to this day, I still continue to carry a camera with me everywhere I go. Those little things that you take away from these types of experiments are amazing. And then just being able to look back too and say, this is what my life was like when I was doing this. This is what my life was like when other experiments that I've done, I didn't wear any black for 4 months, and I didn't use any paper for 4 months, which was a very difficult one. And I got rid of my phone. I had no phone for 4 months, then I had a dumb phone for 4 months. Things like that. They can be really simple changes, but knowing what the world looks like from that perspective, what would life be like if I didn't have access to paper? It makes you change. Yeah, oh gosh, it makes the way that you look at the world very different, but it makes you change your habits a little bit too, and it really makes you think carefully about what you do and where you put your information and how you communicate with people and all types of things. It's super, super valuable, and I would highly recommend it because it does give you perspective and it allows you to really commiserate a little bit. It makes you empathize a little bit better with people.
All right, and one of these lifestyle experiments you did was one of the more popularized experiments in our industry. Of course, I'm talking about minimalism. And you discovered minimalism, I believe, through a striped polo, was it? Could you talk more about your minimalist lifestyle and how it started through that aforementioned striped polo incident?
Absolutely. Minimalism for me was not something that I thought one day, minimalism sounds like a good idea, or I'm going to reduce what I own down to X amount of possessions. Basically, I just realized that there was this stupid shirt, this striped polo that I hadn't worn in forever, but I was still holding on to it just in case one day I decided, oh, I like this polo, which I didn't. And once I got rid of it, I basically just took it out of the drawer and threw it on the floor and said, okay, this is a pile of stuff I'm getting rid of. And then I went through and found some other stuff that was the same thing. I've never worn this, or I wore this once when I first bought it. I'll probably never wear it. I'm holding on to it just in case. And that pile grew and grew. I put it all into a trash bag, took it over to Salvation Army and said, that really feels good. I've got all this free space now. What else can I do this with? And I just went through everything that I owned and started picking out all the stuff I was holding on to for one day. or the stuff that I was holding on to because I felt like I had to, or the stuff that was just sentimental and not practical. And it felt incredibly good. And thankfully, I was able to use that method a little bit later when I decided to start traveling full time. Because at that point, I knew I didn't want to hold on to a bunch of stuff and have a storage container somewhere back in the States while I was traveling.
Yeah.
So reducing down to what could fit in the bag, very useful skill to have. And that's where a lot of people, when they want to travel, they kind of get stuck because they don't know what to take with them. People always overpack and then therefore are not able to experience things as fully as they would otherwise. Getting rid of stuff and then kind of making an experiment out of it and saying, well, what if I try to keep it under this level? Or what if I wonder how low I can go? I wonder what I really need and what I don't need. Yeah, it's really nice to know about yourself. The more I get rid of, I'm pretty stable at around 50 or 60 things at this point, because those are the things that like I need. Those are the things that I need to run my business, the things that I need to have the minimum amount of clothing that's required by law, that type of thing. But I feel much more capable and confident in myself now, knowing that who I am and what I do is not the result of the stuff that I have. It's a result of who I am. And it really forces me to be, I think, a better version of myself as a result.
It sounds liberating. It really does.
Yeah, it's nice. It's really liberating.
And it helps you a lot with your travels, right? Like
Absolutely. Oh my God, it drives me crazy to have to worry about some big bag or multiple bags when I travel somewhere, because then you miss out on all these opportunities. You can't just hop on the back of a scooter and go to a hostel or stay at some stranger's place for the night. You have to put your stuff somewhere, and you have to always worry about your stuff because your stuff might be stolen. Screw stuff. Stuff is fun sometimes, and I've got some things that I really enjoy that make me happy, but stuff can be replaced, and stuff is not what should make you really happy. What should make you happy are the experiences that the stuff allows you to have.
Yes, that is, in your book, in Colin's book, by the way, he talks more about this, how every culture kind of has their own, like, mosquitoes, bugs, because in Thailand you had that problem. And in the U.S., it's the whole. Have you read The Great Gatsby?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, great book. And it's materialism, basically. The U.S. that false American dream bullshit, I guess you could say. But so one of the places actually that I was interested in hearing about, Colin, was New Zealand, because I saw your video, Reflections on New Zealand, in your YouTube. And it seemed like New Zealand, the pictures there were so beautiful. But you talked about how no picture can really emphasize how beautiful it really is. So being there, did it give you some like aha moment, saying like, wow, this is why I travel, or anything similar to that?
Yeah, I've had a lot of those moments since I started traveling, honestly. And New Zealand was probably the first place where it really hit me on that level, because things are just so ridiculously gorgeous and almost like a dreamscape. You go there and you truly can't capture it in photography or video, really. I mean, anything that you've seen in Lord of the Rings or whatnot, it's just a shadow of what it really looks like.
Yeah.
And just standing there, it was also the first place, because when I first started traveling and went to Argentina and stuff, I was trying really hard to really document things and take lots of photos and write about everything. And in New Zealand, I kind of fell into a nice rhythm where some of the stuff I would, but then there were some things where I'd look out at a horizon and just say, this is mine. This one is just for me. I'm not going to try to take in the information and then jot it down right away. I'm just going to have it, and I'm going to take a great mental snapshot and have that forever. And it's important to be able to do that, I think, and that type of atmosphere really just makes you think about everything. It really makes you consider what you're doing, and it was really reaffirming for me too that I was doing what I needed to be doing, because I've never been more happy than when I find myself in those situations that are just so awe-inspiring that I just get a great big stupid smile on my face. Even there's nobody around, I'm just like standing there with this great big stupid smile, and it's all worth it. Yeah. I mean, it's any sacrifices that I make, because there are several that go into this type of lifestyle, totally worth it at that moment, for sure.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, and speaking of sacrifices, wow, this is like perfect. You're like leading me right into the exact thing that I wanted to say. You, Colin Wright, I notice you do clearly walk your talk. And I believe that was clear in this one particular story in the book another one that I really enjoyed. You had a, quote, golden escalator to success in the corporate world when you were developing like the user interfaces. You had a potential mentor in the high ranks of business. Yet you carefully analyzed and you did choose to forego the opportunity to be like successful in the corporate world for this traveling exiledom that you talk about. And that takes guts. And looking back this day, Colin, are you ever curious as to how your life would have been had you chosen the corporate world over the exiledom?
I can't help but be curious, but I kind of know how it would probably have been because I've seen so many people go down that path, and it's an interesting concept because I always think, well, I could do it differently and that type of thing, but I never regret it for a moment. It was a really cool opportunity, but the choice that I made, I literally have never been this happy or ever thought that I could be this happy in my entire life. And every day I'm able to kind of look at what I'm doing and say, if I died right now, I would die doing exactly what I wanted to be doing. No changes, nothing different about it. And that, in my mind, is the kind of the biggest picture of success that I could possibly have for myself.
Absolutely. And Colin, that is a great way. I have a few final words to wrap this up, but thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Colin.
That was my pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
No problem. So to end this morning, like such a weird serendipity here, I was reading this book by Simon Pegg, who's this British actor and comedian called Nerd Do Well, and he wrote this amazing short passage that I just had to share with you. He said, We are never more creative than when we are at odds with the world, and there is nothing so artistically destructive as comfort. To close this off, how do you feel about that quote? And do you feel that the need to be uncomfortable? Do you feel that you really need to be uncomfortable to harness your creative, artistic potential as a designer?
I would say, like with anything, people have different priorities. Some people definitely prioritize comfort over other things. For me, I see a disparity between, at least the way that I view the world and my priorities, there's a disparity between comfort and happiness. And I would always much rather be happy than comfortable. And that doesn't mean necessarily that happiness requires you to be uncomfortable, but I do see kind of a correlation, if not a causation, between the two. So I tend to kind of pursue a bit of discomfort with everything that I do so that I can continue to grow and continue to feel this like wildly, stupidly happy.
Yes, I completely agree. Thank you, Colin Wright. Where can we contact you?
Yeah, it would be great. Anybody who wants to say hi, just shoot me an email at Colin, COLIN, at exilelifestyle.com, or contact me on almost any social network.
Yes, and the website is exilelifestyle.com. The Real Story interview series, Colin Wright, optimisticwellness.com. Optimism is the only way.